It is self-explanatory that nations, as each and every historical event, fall under the law of change. Our city must gradually be built to fit into the following criteria: to benefit production, to benefit daily life, to enrich culture and civilization in a way that is tidy, clean, and beautiful.
But we are not against beauty, but against superfluities.
Faced with the lure of material goods and the seduction of power, cultural distinctiveness loses out and urban uniformity is imposed.
That which was beautiful yesterday is not beautiful anymore today, and that which is beautiful today will not be beautiful anymore tomorrow.
Nalazite se u prostoru Salona Muzeja savremene umetnosti i samostalne izložbe Jasmine Cibic Srušiti, iznova, izgraditi. Dakle, tear down and rebuild. Saradnja uspostavljena 2013. godine kada sam ja boravila u Londonu i naime baš mi je bilo ovako dosta interesantno, zanimljivo. Imala sam ovako kažem projekat da upoznam umetnike koji žive i rade u Londonu, a iz naših zemalja, te sam tamo i upoznala Jasminu. Upravo nisam videla taj rad, ali sam toliko čula o njemu sa Venecijanskog bijenala 2013. kad je Jasmina predstavljala Republiku Sloveniju i nekako je tada i krenula naša saradnja i priča oko neke nastupajuće izložbe i eventualne dalje saradnje. Ono što je bilo zanimljivo i što možda, evo, možemo i odmah da krenemo od nekoga, vi se nalazite u prostoru izložbe koja sama po sebi, to je ona karakteristika Jasmininog izlaganja, nema toliko, kako da kažem, elemenata unutar same postavke, to je vrlo svedena postavka, vrlo precizno osmišljena, da li je to film, da li je to par struktura i ono što je bilo juče zanimljivo, imali smo taj performativni akt ili performativnu akciju kada su devojke ispisivale ova zlatna stolova i podebljavale, tako da nekako u suštini stvari Jasminina praksa je vrlo slojevita, ali sam izlagački način nije toliko. Te stoga, mislim, prosto i neka forma vođenja ne može da bude od objekta do objekta, nego nekako da vam se ukaže na strukturu njenog delovanja i da posle pogledate stvari. Sve što je u galeriji ima svoju simboliku, koja je možda malo otrgnuta od nekog prostora i vremena, te stoga je, ali dosta kao takva ima element osim dekorativnosti i nekog šireg značenja. Recimo, baš ova polja trouglasna na kojima sedimo su zapravo elementi koji su iz nekakvih arhiva dekoracijskog elementa, ali tako, Palate Sivi ili današnje Palate Srbije, te stoga to možda ne biste prepoznali, ali eto, to je upravo uzrok kako ona istražuje i preuzima objekte. Možda, ja ću se i kasnije nadovezati malo na samu postavku izložbu, ali možda bi sad i baš pitala Jasminu na engleskom. Jasmina, can you explain us a bit about the setup and the whole this situation about the first, I may say this, lobby, about the first part of the exhibition and the second part, as we did it like cinematic space. This kind of the maybe unwhite cube, or how to say, maybe this kind of the really separate space that you do.
Thank you, Una.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Una. Hvala, Una. Samo da kažem da pričat ćemo na engleskom, pošto imamo ljudi koji su bili veliki suradnici na projektu, Michelle i Rona, i nekako smo htjeli da njih uključimo u razgovor, tako da nadam se da vam je u redu. Ako neko nešto ne razume, molim vas, pitajte. To come to the structure of the show and start from what we can see and then go maybe into the larger body of the work, this somehow sort of like a two-partitude exhibition making strategy has somehow come into my practice with the last project I did in Ljubljana. in MGLC, in the Graphic Center this year, where we were left only with 2 rooms to propose quite a large project. And it was what started to be a very pragmatic question of how to present a very sort of big, large body of work in a sort of very small and quite concise and also, contextually very specific space, ended up in developing this idea of an architectural trailer. And we ended up creating a cinematic space for the projection of a film, which is a different film work, and the room in front of it somehow ended up functioning as this kind of antechamber almost, so sort of almost like a waiting room before an experience happens. And that antechamber, so the waiting room, was basically taking certain architectural elements from the building of the Palace of Serbia, that we then shot the following film in. So somehow there was this idea of not only making a film trailer, but how an installation can become a trailer for the next project. Because this whole, this 3-part structure of this project, which was the larger body of work called Spielraum, and this is the 3rd chapter of this, had this idea of this this recycling, this play with, taking some older elements, bringing in some new elements, and also questioning the production, the artistic production of today, and how every exhibition, always needs to be a new thing, and how this kind of contextual value of the site or context specificity can be actually, kind of reworked as well. Because, it also has to do with production values and, how these things are, how new language is invented, involved, and produced, and how, this can be actually this, kind of almost like a mimicking structure of how actually cultural capitalism works. So now to go a step back, the entire project Spielraum, as I mentioned, somehow formed 3 parts. The title itself comes from an article, an essay called Spielraum, which was problematizing decoration in language and the visual language, so art and architecture, as the negative elements of every authority, every transnational authority, but whichever authority that sort of uses these tactics as elements of soft power. And effectively, this idea of Spielraum, I really wanted to read it in comparison to how soft power works. So, what happens to the visual language and language itself when it becomes recognizable as an illustration of a certain ideology, and then what happens to it when this ideology fails to function. So of course, we're left with, what is very obvious. We are left with buildings, we're left with walls, monuments, artworks, and so on, that have a certain aesthetic quality that is recognizable of course, the time and the authority that somehow elevated it to the, to the aura, or gave it the aura that it had. So of course, what we are, kind of seeing in the last 10 years and so, of course, are these, big reappropriations of modernism, especially in sculpture, especially of this, former East, whatever you want to call it. And what really struck me was that what was happening, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's a fact. What is really interesting is that all these structures were brought to the eyes of the public, East and West, for, the second time around, because we're talking about reappropriations, for the first time as a fiction via artists. So there's this really interesting conceptual twist here, So we're looking at, architectures that have not been historically dealt with internationally because of, lack of funding, practical things. Completely, it's a pragmatic thing. And now, artist names are taking them out of the context and presenting them. And of course, artists are not historians. Artists are not art historians or, architectural historians. So there's this questioning of the methodology of work, which is very important. How does an artist deal with these things? And, are there, propositions given or positions taken? It's about how are we questioning this whole domain? And currently, especially if, we're coming back to the territory and to Siv itself and, the greater story that I was investigating with this part of the project, which was the aesthetics of the non-aligned, really, this is now on the international art map again. The kind of philosophical and ideological concepts of Yugoslavia are being woken up again. There's big books that Igor Štiks and Srećko Horvat are writing, Welcome to the Desert of Post-Socialism. So, these things are brewing up. There's a big project that's coming up with I think it's a European project about the aesthetics of the non-aligned in the next 2 years. So, it's there. So it's this big question: how are we addressing this? Who are the people working on this? Are we creating readers of these projects? Or are we connecting people? Are we connecting different institutions and different artists to really investigate this and actually ask some maybe new questions? So it's not a play of geopolitical exoticisms. So this was somehow the underlying idea of this investigation. And with the entire project, I somehow wanted to, also open it up. So I was trying to abstract or kind of take away from this idea of revisiting a certain past which has one specific geopolitical sort of symbolic, but kind of say, look, these are very universal structures that are happening all over again in every territory. So this was the questioning. This was basically really looking at the structure. So not so much, we were talking with Una about this a lot. It's not about this historical, rear view mirror look, nostalgic, implications and so on. But it's about looking at how can we create sort of maybe new productive stances. And the project itself is definitely not trying to make any specific statements. It is really a reader, and I really want the whole project to be conceived as a reader. There's also it's a big team effort, and we have Mateja Šetina here, who is a key architectural co-worker on the whole project. Michelle Dainan, an Irish filmmaker, an artist, who is also not just that she's the editor of the film you can see here, but she's also a very integral curatorial advisor of the whole thing. We also have Rona Kopecki, who curated the first chapter of Spielraum in Ludwig, and we have Una here. So it's somehow the circle is kind of like concluding in Belgrade, and it's really wonderful to bring all these people together and also revisit the project and kind of look at it. What was successful, what wasn't. What failed, what worked, and this is what is very, very important with this work. That it's very experimental, because of course, it's contextual. We brought it to Belgrade. This is why I think it's also very important to bring certain, English curators to see the film here, because it changes so much its meaning and so on. So also this is why we wanted to make this performance with local Serbian artists. So this is the Spielraum. This is this free play. So the structure is mimicking its form. But to tell you a bit more now about the things you can see. So the big wallpaper images are basically collages of landscapes that are all drawn from archives from the Museum of Yugoslav History. But they are from the archives, but they're not from the kind of official selection of the icons of the time. But they are the images that the artists who were in the servitude of the state, so the artists/photographers that were following the Yugoslavian diplomacy throughout the world, so they're the images that they took when they turned away from what they were supposed to be photographing. So there was this double game that I was very, very intrigued with, this idea of the artist working for the state, or, the poetics, the question of this poetics, the poetic space and so on. So, when the artist turns away and takes the photograph of the landscape, is this the moment of the personal poetics, or is this the moment of framing the scenography of where the political debate that was to, shape the world after the Second World War, was taking place, So it's always this duality. So this is somehow also like the kind of underlying thing of this whole project, this double game, of this functioning. So these are montages of different landscapes from all over the world, from India to Africa to Slovenia to Serbia. So there was this idea of creating this imaginative, non-existing landscape, somehow in a similar way to how the film creates an imaginative building. So there's also some script translations in Serbian. The film itself has also the structure of collage, which is also the entire project. So it's a collage of ready-mades. It's a collage of ready-made language, forms, photographs, and they're somehow reassembled into this total theater. And through the dialogue of the film, we're creating a non-existing building, basically. So the script, the copy-pastes, they are from different politicians, from political activists, from ISIS fighters, so from very different people, but what they all have in common is that they were all speeches or proclamations about tearing something down. Something that was so wrong that it wasn't representative anymore of a transnational structure. Throughout the last 2 centuries, we were somehow looking at this time. So the buildings that these guys were discussing, they were, of course, well, there's a few women, mostly men, of course, in the original script. And you'll see it's really interesting to kind of read it with the footnotes, because it's also, each person we were quoting appears in 4 variations. So different speeches were identified as different positions within this ideas of nation building. So we have a nation builder, we have an artist-architect, we have a pragmatist, and we have a conservationist. Now, the script was researched there was quite a few researchers involved, Jelica Jovanović and Mateja Šetina, and also Ana Panić was helping a lot, and it was edited and put together in collaboration with Izzy Charman, who is a really amazing English scriptwriter and researcher. So, just to give you an idea, there's like really a lot of people involved, and each of these people was also approached because of their contextual value for the kind of where they come from, and what is sort of their their field of work as well. So that was kind of quite a big part of it as well. So we have from Hitler to Stalin to ISIS fighters and so on, and each person is presented in very different positions. So once Hitler might be a nation builder in this film, once his words might be those of a pragmatist. So there's also this whole idea of how these figures change. And the film is basically, it is a collage, but we were trying to achieve a coherent dialogue. So there would be this idea that like it would be a transcript of an actual debate. You will see in the film, it's a 3-chapter piece really, which is in constant loop, and there's these sort of 3 meetings that happen across the building, and in between these 3 scenes there are these 2 camera inserts of kind of like a chorus almost. So it's a very traditional structure, 3-part structure with this chorus who is talking to the spectator, somehow leading the spectator through the film. So this is somehow the structure of the Belgrade project. Now, the whole entire spielraum was very complex, and I wouldn't go into the whole thing right now because I don't want to, confuse you all, because we're in the process of making a catalog, and we're now kind of trying to, find the way how to present it coherently, because, these are very big themes, and we want to do them justice.
Can you just say, Jasmina, something about the Palace of Serbia, former Palace of Federation? What was how can we see this kind of the role of the architecture in the film? It is a bit theatrical, like lodge, but it's also, I can say, it's not that is indifferent, or it is not that is on the side of the talk. It has some political, or the political connotation. It is very static, like you see the whole building. The narrative is, it doesn't refer on the building, but the building becomes an actor itself. So why you choose this kind of the building here? Because everybody I know will ask that in a way. I know it's a big representative building, but why you choose that, and how you can explain the role of the building itself in the film?
Thank you, Una. Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, and it's when you start working on a project and you're drawn towards something and you're drawn to it for maybe different reasons than the initial levels of reading of it are, you still have to ask yourselves, well, what are those levels of reading? And we had a great professor who said, you have to know the difference between self-awareness and self-delusion. So this is where, why I'm saying this is because, of course, it's a very, very, very symbolic object, really. It's an art object. And, my work really plays around, these kind of structures a lot. And my work is in a way kind of, it's subtle in a way that, it kind of plays with these systems by utilizing the system's own code of messaging. So, if we're looking at political structures, the political architecture, I'm looking at political speech, for example, in that way. So how the whole project started, now going back to ancient Rome, was the idea was to make a film which would take the viewer through 3 different buildings. And it would be sort of along the lines of the Sukura of Russian art, where there's the camera going through the Hermitage and kind of describes the Russian history in one shot, just to kind of give you the idea. So it was this idea of kind of how to connect 3 buildings that all face very similar fate, very similar conditions, but they come from different territories, different times, and definitely they have different aesthetic. That wasn't possible for, of course, financial and budget reasons. So, I was thinking, well, do we wait until we get film funding, or do we just start? And, look at these things and how do they work and what can we actually make happen. So the idea to film in Civ started with, it actually came from my last film I did for the Venice Biennial that I filmed in the Slovenian parliament. It's that whole thing of, how to represent the nation, and of course, the Sanja Vikovic piece is really brilliant of, why an artist cannot represent a nation. So the Venice project was going along those lines. But, I was really, really intrigued by the architecture itself, and how, the architecture that's supposed to frame a nation state, all these sort of kind of little kind of like loopholes that kind of form there. And also like little kind of, very kind of interesting and unexpected little turns, and how strong actually this idea of soft power is within the speak of the power that you as a spectator don't know about. So the Venice project was, it was going very conceptually in the ways of that everything was local. So I was investigating local, so Slovenian architecture, Slovenian national icons, we had Slovenian actors, we had a Slovenian Hitler bug, so everything was Slovenian, So this was this idea of really over-identifying, and, playing that game. So the Slovenian parliament had this very interesting story that it was the architect behind the Slovenian parliament, or actually it's legally termed an extension, which is another interesting thing, that the parliament itself is just an extension, was Vinko Glanc, who was an architect who was like the protocol architect in Slovenia after the Second World War. And about him there were only 2 articles written until a PhD by Nika Grabar, which was like a few years ago. So Nika was, a key researcher and a key contributor to that project, and it was really amazing to see through with her how these structures were being formed, how history was written, and how because Glanc was not a big star modernist architect, but he was the one who was translating for the state, because there was of course no money. He had to reinvent the parliament. They didn't have money to build it, so he had to make an extension. He had to basically renovate Villa Bled, which was initially an Austro-Hungarian hunting castle with a very traditional pitched roof. Then it was bought by the king of Yugoslavia, and then it was the home for the Hitlerjugend, and then Tito got it. But basically, the state. But Tito had it for the summer residency. And there's this really famous anecdote that Tito said to Glanc, all big European presidents have flat roofs. So, off goes the roof. And, from this like really traditional hunting Austro-Hungarian castle with the roof, we get this modernist villa, And this is like in the time that there was nothing, they had to like smuggle these pins for sofas from Trieste, It's, the end of 40s and early 50s, and, it's, how it was. So, but this was really interesting, So, and then we found these transcripts from these meetings between the architect and the politicians of the time when they were building this new parliament, of how they were delegating where which artist puts the image. So it was like, okay, we're going to have local wood, local stone, and we're going to have local artists. We're going to have the best artists of our country. But they had like clearly designated bits where these paintings had to go. So this was this also this like interest that I had with Civ, of course, with this heritage resolutions and so on. And it was really interesting what was happening with the embassies of former Yugoslavia, because they were then giving the artworks they were returning. So Croatian artists to Croatia, Serbian artists to Serbia. Now if a work is a part of a building, you can't tear it out. So, and this was kind of quite an interesting thing as well. What do you do with these things? And it's not specifically about the territory, because this is it's a general condition. This happens all over the world. But how do you return soft power? And also this whole, this idea of reversing these mechanisms. It's a paradox, right? So Civ, back to Civ. With Civ, I was also looking at the Chancellor Bungalow in Bonn, for example, and the National Opera House in Estonia, not Estonia, Lithuania. And so these were all these buildings that were built for a certain purpose that they don't serve anymore. So for example, the Opera House in Lithuania it's this glorious, amazing, beautiful building, and it was basically built so amazingly because it was built because the Communist Party needed like a big hall for some summit. So that's how they managed to get the money for the cultural hall. And now it's a ballet theater and so on, but it's also like all these little kind of structures, and how then these buildings they don't of course serve this initial purpose, but they are these amazing monuments. They don't fit anymore. Are they now tourist attractions? How do you deal with them basically? But what they all have in common is that they become pure theaters. I mean, they're built as theaters anyway in the first thing anyway, but now they don't have the actors. The interesting thing is that they become, as Una said, they become actors themselves. So this was this beautiful thing that I thought this would be quite interesting to say what happens with this building if it is an actor. So in this film, the building's voice it's the music. So the music is actually, it's basically like a reverberation of architecture. So there's this idea that the architecture is coming through almost as this organism. It's kind of coming out from this background, from the scenography. The other thing is, of course, in a way, we didn't want to potentialize the architecture too much, and it's virtually impossible. This is really interesting. This is back to to the maybe even question of White Cube or theater, or like how these spaces work, because they are so clever. It's all about how they tell you how to film. And it was absolutely an amazing experience, because you cannot not do that shot. You kind of see that it has this representation strategies inherent with its own design. And it's absolutely, mind-blowing to be working within such a building, And of course, these buildings are all made to be the scenography for the politicians, and this is back to this, this is this turn. So we wanted to make this turn. We wanted to say, okay, let's not look at the politicians, let's look at this. Let's look at the emptied out landscape that is framing the politicians that are absent. So hence Civ. And then to the women, this is that was also a very interesting point, because when it was the first time we were doing casting, really, and there was this idea of so who do we get, which actors do we get to play these 4 roles? So we had the roles, and then we started, okay, how do you make the selection? Do you make it as it is in real life? So you'd have 4 men. Do you do it politically correct? You would probably have 1 woman, 3 men, to be still realistic. Then, if you do this, which role should the woman play? Pragmatist? So you kind of end up in this like really weird sort of, kind of basically like what probably a TV station would need to be doing for like, regulation sakes and so on. So then I said, what, if we're looking at all these things and like architecture and representation and, we're questioning desire-making strategies, And if you look at the sculptures in the film, and we didn't move them, I swear, and I actually really only noticed it in the edit, all the sculptures are representations of naked women bodies. In the film, and so the artworks in Civ, And also when you're in the archives, of course, woman is not present there and so on. So there was this idea of, okay, let's take 4 allegories. Let's take 4 women, who are these 4 allegories that kind of come out of the, they have the same colors as the building. So they're kind of like reactivating the architecture itself. So as, the architecture is a plinth for this, you know, for the political speak, these women are the plinths for language, for spoken language. So there was this analogy there, you know. So hence the gender distribution.
Do you have some questions, maybe? You can ask on Serbian also. So
one question regarding the source of the photo material. I suppose it's like mainly source of the Museum of History of Yugoslavia, or you use some other sources? Archive. Okay, yeah.
So the photographs are from the Museum of Yugoslav History, but then and this is the part of Spielraum that kind of isn't really present here that much. It was very present in Ludwig Museum, the show Rona curated, which was the startup of this creation of a new nation, new fictitious nation, was these. So, and this is from the archive of Yugoslavia. So what we were looking with Jelica, we were looking for the words of, you know, creating the architecture for the new nation and for the tearing down through the archives. And it was really difficult because, you know, architecture was, you know, then it was basically in the part of this kind of građevinarstvo. So it wasn't a part of art. It wasn't considered art. It was, you know, it was really like building, you know. So you had this amazing, we found these beautiful, beautiful shopping lists, you know. How much color should Yugoslavia buy? How many kilos of red? How many kilos of yellow? How many kilos of red schools should get? And how many artists? Which is, okay, another thing, which is beautiful, amazing, incredible. But there were no words, you know. So, but we found these plans for the city of New Belgrade that were done by the artists and architects for the first conference of the non-aligned. So these are like floor plans, basically. There was lots of plans that then we developed in Ludwig show, and you know there were like plans for this was basically some info boxes, I think, and umbrella stands and pots for flowers, and basically they redesigned the whole city for this spectator. So again, we come to this like shifting of the view of like, you know, how do you present this new non-aligned movement, you know, how do you describe it aesthetically, how do you frame it, and so on. So that for me was, you know, and it's the same as now if you look at, you know, how they design cities for the European City of Culture, the London Olympics, it's the same, you know, they always fix up the facades, they move poor people out, you know, it's the same. So we had it in Ljubljana now a few years ago, you know. And so these structures were really interesting for me. And also with these things, you know, it was quite interesting of how they become just these sort of, you know, kind of almost like souvenirs of these plans that were like kind of quite unrealized, loads of them, but they also become furniture, you know. So I was really wanted to kind of develop this idea that all these like kind of representations kind of become like, you know, kind of almost like a pop-out book, hence these, you know, kind of extensions, you know. So yeah, that's...